This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
Do you ever have a story that you just can't get out of your head?
One that you play the details of over and over with your friends?
Well, you've come to the right place. I'm Claire.
And I'm Susan.
And this is Justice Pending,
a weekly true crime podcast where we discuss tantalizing crimes with more questions than answers.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Justice Pending. I'm Claire.
And I'm Susan. And on this podcast, we dig into the cases that stick with us, unsolved, unresolved, and oftentimes unsettling.
Today's case is shocking not because of its complexity, but because of how quickly and violently a seemingly ordinary day turned fatal. It happened in the middle of a high school track meet. Broad daylight, dozens of witnesses. And now, one teenager is dead and another is charged with murder. The entire Frisco, Texas community is on edge.
This is the case of Austin Metcalf. He was 17 years old, a junior at Memorial High School in Frisco, Texas, athletic, kind, had a twin brother, and on April 2nd, he was stabbed in the chest at a track meet by another student who was also 17 years old, named Carmelo Anthony.
I know what you're thinking, but it's not that Carmelo Anthony. This Carmelo is a student at a rival high school in Frisco called Centennial High. And what's at the center of this case is a tent. Literally a tent.
A tent.
Yes. So according to multiple witnesses from the track meet, Austin asked Carmelo to leave the Memorial team tent, and Carmelo refused. And within moments, Austin was bleeding out in his brother's arms.
So let's walk through what happened moment by moment. And then we'll dig into the questions this case raises, because this isn't just about two teenagers. It's about the court of public opinion, misinformation, race, and what it means to be in a community crisis.
Absolutely, Susan. I live in the Dallas area, and this case has just completely rocked the world of Dallas as a whole. It's been all over the media. People are talking about it. Like, anytime we get together, this case comes up because it's so unbelievable that something like this could happen, to two kids. It's just this tragedy that people want to try to understand, and they want to, make sure that something like this never happens again. I feel like it's just so hard for these families to think that they should be celebrating like the end of a school year, going into the summer, and instead it's this unbelievably tragic time, for both families. And it's just a really sad situation, and it feels so heavy, honestly.
Yeah. I mean, let's get into it.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's set the scene. So April 2nd, a high school stadium in the suburbs. It's a cloudy day in Frisco. It's kind of dreary. Nothing about it seemed like it would make headlines. But at some point, Austin Metcalf sees Carmelo Anthony sitting under the Memorial tent. It's standard high school track meet etiquette. You stick with your own team's tent.
And here's where the accounts start to come in. Multiple witnesses said Austin asked Carmelo to move. And reportedly, Carmelo said, "Touch me and see what happens." So at that point, witnesses say, Austin did touch Carmelo. And they exchanged more words. And then Carmelo pulled a knife from his bag and stabbed Austin once, directly in the chest.
It was a chaotic scene, to say the least. Austin started grabbing his chest and was calling for help. And then he just collapsed. Austin's twin brother, Hunter, was right there. And, he tried to stop the bleeding. He called their mother. He was screaming for help. But it all happened so fast, and it was too late to help Austin.
And that image as a twin holding his brother, as I mean, it's just gutting. That's trauma for life.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this is the kind of thing that no one should ever have to endure. It's the stuff that, you think someone would write in a horror movie. It's not you don't think this could be real life. And, after this stabbing, which also I just have to think about, like, just one stab wound ends up killing someone. Like, it's so it just happens so fast. You think of a gunshot, sure, one gunshot kills someone, but you don't really think of one knife wound being fatal. But it absolutely was in this case. So in the aftermath, Carmelo fled. So he runs from the scene. He doesn't get far. He's arrested the same day. According to the arrest affidavit, he immediately told police, "I was protecting myself," along with an admission that he did it. Reportedly, he also asked officers if what he did could be considered self-defense.
Yeah, and that's been the defense's argument ever since. Carmelo's family says he was being bullied, even jumped with the conversation exchanged.
Right.
And his cousin posted on Facebook that the Metcalf twins tried to break his phone and stomp on it, but police reports don't support that claim. Witness reports don't support that claim. And Austin was unarmed himself.
Right. So, the idea that you're at this track meet and there's rival high schools, there are people with a lot of passion and, these kind of rivalries can run hot, right? So the idea that he was on the turf of another team, of another school, I can see how that could be, a heated situation and uncomfortable situation, but also it was his choice to go to this rival team's tent and to sit down. Like, he, at least from everything that I've read and seen, he walked over there voluntarily and sat down in the other team's tent. If any other information comes out, I'd certainly be interested to hear it, but that's the way it's always been, presented to me. And, something that's really important, legally speaking, is that you can't provoke a fight and then claim self-defense when you escalate it with a weapon. So prosecutors are expected to argue that, this idea of self-defense is negated by the fact that Carmelo was the one who brought a knife to this argument.
Yeah, and because he's 17, the district attorney has confirmed that he won't face the death penalty or life without
Right.
parole. There's a Supreme Court ruling in Roper versus Simmons. Those sentences are off the table for anyone under 18. But yeah, like, it does seem a little provocative for him to have gone knowing it's not ethical, really, in the world of high school track meets, to go sit under the rival team's tent. You have to wonder, why does he have a knife on him anyway? Why is it so accessible? Why does he jump so quickly
Yeah.
to using it? You wonder, was it just to scare him and it got out of hand, or what went on there?
Yeah. I mean, anytime you introduce a weapon into a fight, you are on very, disturbing ground and dangerous ground. And suddenly, it's not just a verbal altercation between two teenagers. It can very quickly turn deadly and have lifetime consequences. And I think, sadly, teenagers many times are not thinking through their actions or not thinking about long term, what's going to be the ripple effect of doing this. But, even though they're not adults yet, they are capable of doing something, that has lifetime consequences. And so it's just really so sad. I think as a parent, you just feel for both of these kids, and you cannot believe that something as typical, average, rival high schools at a track meet could turn into this incredibly rare, unusual, fatal encounter. Some people have tried to say that the Collin County District Attorney shouldn't be this, lenient on Carmelo, but, actually they're just following the law. They don't have those options available to them. They cannot seek the death penalty or life without parole because Carmelo was under the age of 18 whenever he allegedly, committed this crime. So I think it's important to recognize that this is established legal precedent and it's not anything that's up for debate.
Yeah, I mean, I do think I see the public opinion of inequity on, well, Austin has had a lifelong, well, unfortunately ended his life, and his family has a lifelong consequence where Carmelo, legally cannot have a lifelong consequence.
Yeah. Yeah, because you can get life in prison, which means you'll be eligible for parole after 40 years is usually the time frame. And so if you look at, of course we're getting ahead of ourselves here, but if you look at the possibilities going forward and if he were to be convicted and sentenced to life with the possibility of parole, he would have to serve 40 years. So, as if this isn't fraught enough of a crime, there's another element that is causing a lot of controversy: race. The fact that Austin is white and Carmelo is black. This has been seized upon by extremists. And just 3 weeks after the stabbing, a white supremacist group held a rally at a Frisco school, claiming that this was a hate crime against white people.
Yeah, oh gosh, it's just not, just irresponsible. It's dangerous. It's actually against the wishes of the victim's family.
Yes.
The Metcalf family has explicitly asked people not to racialize this, not to, read more into this than a terribly tragic altercation. Austin's dad, Jeff, said it best. He said this was not a race thing. This is not a political thing. Please don't comment if you don't know what happened.
Yes, and I think it's so important to consider the victim's family and where they're coming from on this, and the fact that they are imploring people not to talk about it in racial terms, that, we should listen to them. They are the ones who are experiencing this trauma, and if they're asking people to, please refrain from making this a racial issue, then, I think that's something that, people should honor, but it's not stopping people. Misinformation has exploded online. There are all sorts of fake documents out there. So it was really interesting, researching this case and getting ready for this episode. Had to really be on my guard because people are putting out bad information about this case in an attempt to inflame, the racial tension. And so both families have been doxxed. They put out their information online. People have had to move. The Metcalfs were swatted, which is when someone makes a fake 911 call to send police to your house as though, shots have been fired or someone, is, attempting to take their own life. They can say any number of things, but it is a crime, by the way, to make a false report to 911 and say that there's an emergency when there's not. Obviously, it is a terrible thing to do to the family who's going to be confronted by police, and they're going to come in many cases with guns drawn and expecting a potential violent altercation. And then also you're taking resources away from the police. This is not a real crime. There's not a real danger. And who knows what they would be responding to were they not responding to this fake call. So the idea that on top of the trauma of having their child murdered, they now have to deal with these fake calls where the police are responding to their house, and it just sounds like a nightmare on top of a nightmare.
Yeah, it's certainly, I mean, this has escalated and heated. And Carmelo's family, they've even had to leave their home. This even went to the judge. I mean, the judge lowered his bond. He was doxxed too. I mean, real safety threats. And it's really coming from a place where people are paying attention to social media headlines instead of what actually happened. Not that not to downplay what happened, but it's really important to understand, like, leave it. It is what it is. And let's not make more of it than it is. Let's not aggravate the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the people who are directly involved are calling for this to stop, right? So the idea that the general public, people who are just online reading about this, are contributing to the chaos, it's it's really hard to fathom. Like, who are these people? Why are they inserting themselves into this case and causing, more stress and trauma for these families that have been through way too much already? So I really hope that things, calm down, and that tempers cool, and that the families are able to just deal with this privately, because this ongoing, media cycle where people are adding, additional trauma, it it's so upsetting to me, like, especially as a journalist. Like, I want to report on the facts of the case, and I want to help people understand what happened and what didn't happen. And the idea that, this whole spiral, where people are now like, this didn't have to happen. Like, this is completely unreasonable reaction from the public. So, let's talk about some of the other facts in the case. Carmelo was initially held on $1 million bond, which is pretty standard, for a murder charge. And then, through his attorneys, he was able to get it reduced to $250,000. That ruling made a lot of people angry.
Yeah, and so did another decision. Frisco ISD quietly allowed Carmelo to graduate, even though he's under house arrest. So he won't walk at the ceremony, of course, but he will technically get to graduate and get his diploma.
Yes. So this, has really added to the community reaction. People, I think, misunderstood a lot of this information and thought that he was going to get to walk across the stage, and people were like, "Oh no, not, this isn't happening." And I get that. That would be very inappropriate. Um, you know, the fact that Frisco ISD decided that, based on, the amount of time that he had completed already in, his studies, and how far along they were in the school year, that he was going to be able to graduate as a senior. Um, that's something we can certainly wonder about, from like an administrative academic perspective, but he's not going to walk at the ceremony. There is no public safety risk. And so I think that that's important, that people recognize that this is something that's happening in private, it's not a public thing.
Right. I mean, and we all know this isn't, I mean, the whole thing is really not about a tent, because I think people are like, why would we stab someone over a tent? It's about, you know, it's about a mentality. It's about, a conflict that just boiled over in seconds. To me, though, it's really about a knife being in a school backpack. I mean, that to me just sends alarm bells. It shouldn't have been there. Why was it there? Why does he feel comfortable? Why does he think you can carry a knife around?
Yeah.
And where does that leave us?
Yes, I totally agree. The school district's role in this, people are asking, why weren't bags searched whenever they came into the stadium? Should students be checked more closely at these types of large events? I know, when you're coming in with athletics, a lot of times you have like a duffel bag and a backpack, you have a change of clothes, you have, so there's lots of stuff that people are, carrying on their person. And we'd like to think that no one's putting a weapon in these bags, but I don't believe there are metal detectors, that are used at these events. I know some schools have them, but it was never mentioned or discussed that there was a metal detector employed at, this stadium. And so I think people have rightly raised that issue and wanted to know, what the school district was going to do moving forward to protect students and to search bags. If you go to any stadium, concert, large event these days, they usually have like a clear bag policy. There's lots of things that have been implemented in the last, probably decade to try to prevent people bringing weapons into large spaces. And so the idea that they could have done that in this case, I think, is one of those hindsight's 2020 situations. And hopefully, going forward, maybe there will be a new policy that will make students and parents feel more safe at events like this.
Yeah, I hope so, because I feel like that would really support the students at Memorial High. I mean, they just lost a classmate, and then, they'll at some point be expected to go back in that same stadium. So I do feel like the district does need to clean that up pretty quickly.
Yes, and it's not just the kids who need answers, it's the whole town. There's grief, there's anger, there's fear. And even amid all of that, there's compassion. So Austin's dad, Jeff Metcalf, has said publicly that he forgives Carmelo.
Yeah, I I am quite impressed with that. I'm not sure I could be the same way, especially so, having it be so raw and close. So that is very impressive.
I agree. I was exactly the same. I was impressed by that, and it did happen very quickly that he said he forgave him. And that's no small thing to be able to do in the middle of your grief, in the middle of an investigation, pre-trial. I'm kind of speechless with that he came forward and said that. And here you have, other people who aren't personally touched by this acting completely differently. And you have the victim's father, putting this compassion out there. I thought that was really beautiful.
Yeah, and also Austin's twin, he's come forward and sort of echoed that sentiment, but also said, he didn't deserve it. Well, yes. I mean, no one is arguing with that. And, this poor kid has to just live with that scene. So, top of mind. So for him to even be able to make a public statement is also very, very impressive.
Yes, I agree. And I know that both of these families, will continue to deal with the aftermath of this crime for the rest of their lives. And the legal case, is still pending. More than 30 witnesses have been interviewed. There is no trial date set, but we'll be watching to see what happens next.
Yep. And, we'll hopefully get justice there. And, this did shatter two families, shook a community. It's not about picking a side. It's letting the truth come forward without the noise.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us on Justice Pending. If you learned something today, please share this episode and be sure to come back next week.
And if you have a case you think we should cover, please reach out to us on our website, justicepending.com. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and stay tuned.
Justice Pending is recorded in Dallas, Texas for Rebel Studios. It's hosted by me, Claire Sanama, and Susan Passoni. Our theme music is Bending Truth, licensed at premiumbeat.com. We appreciate all listener feedback. Leave a review wherever you're listening right now, and we might read it on the air.
This has been a Rogue Media Network production.